What's the most entitled request someone made that backfired horribly on them? My boyfriend Miles and I finally announced that we were getting married on June 2nd, exactly 1 year since we started officially dating. Everyone was excited, except for my sister Lori, who shot up so fast her chair fell backward. "Sorry, what? June is my wedding month! Mine!" she screamed. The room went completely silent. Miles tried to defuse the situation by saying she could also have her wedding in June, but Lori refused to listen. She turned to me with pure rage in her eyes and demanded I pick another month. July, August, September, she didn't care. Just not June. You knew June was important to me. It's my favorite word in the dictionary, and I only dated guys named June. She shoved at my shoulder and stormed out shouting, "Change it by Monday or I'll make sure you don't have a wedding at all." I thought she was exaggerating until Monday morning. All our vendors suddenly called me saying that someone from the family requested cancellations. I immediately apologized and tried to explain to them it was a mistake, that I never requested it. Most of them were understanding. Others just didn't want to deal with all the drama involved. Luckily, we managed to find alternative vendors to fill those in. But then a week later, at the bridal appointment, Lori snuck red wine in a Starbucks cup and poured it all over my dressing during a viewing appointment. I had to pay an extra $3,000 for the dry cleaning alone. And to top it off, she created a family group chat just to send fake screenshots of my boyfriend Miles begging her to run away with him. "You can't marry a guy who's not loyal to you," she told me in a tagged message. But Miles quickly proved they were just photoshopped. That's when my family thought enough was enough, telling her in the group chat to calm down and leave me and Miles alone. Lori was appalled. "Are you seriously gonna just let her get away with this?" "Get away with what? Getting married?" my auntie replied. "Get away with stealing my month." But I had enough of it. "Lori," I said, "you don't even have a boyfriend. But if you continue trying to sabotage my wedding plans, well, I'm sorry, but you're uninvited from the wedding." "Well, when I get married in June, none of you will be invited," she said before deleting the group chat. I honestly thought that was the end of it. But at my bridal shower, Lori burst in wearing a massive engagement ring, handing out wedding invitations, even to girls who barely knew her. "Surprise! I'm getting married and we'll be having the wedding on June 1st. She waved an invitation in my face. "Oh wait, you're not invited." She threw her head back laughing. The security guard at the venue noticed the distressed look on my face and quickly dragged Lori out. Even though Lori seemed thrilled, something still wasn't sitting right. Then Mom called me in a shaky voice, mentioning she saw Lori's fiancé Liam shove her into a wall when she had accidentally handed him the wrong drink from the fridge. Not only that, even in photos, Lori started appearing with bruises all over her arms, and each time Mom brought it up to her, she'd just laugh it off, saying that his way of showing love was just different than most. But then just a day before her wedding, she was seen with a large black eye. I walked into a door. "It's not a big deal. I can still get married," she insisted. I tried reaching out to her, to let her know that whatever it was that was going on, if she's getting hurt, it's not worth it. She ignored my texts. Then came her wedding. Overall, it was successful, but that night, during what should have been my rehearsal dinner, Liam broke 3 of her ribs for flirting with his cousin. And on the morning of my wedding, Lori landed in the ICU with internal bleeding, refusing to press charges. During my ceremony, Lori posted from her hospital bed, tagging all our guests. While everyone celebrates at my sister's wedding, I'm in the ICU because she needed to compete with me. I was forced to rush the most important decision of my life because she couldn't let me have the one thing I'd always dreamed of. She texted me, "My blood is on your wedding dress. Remember that when you walk down the aisle feeling all pretty?" Then she had the audacity to send to our family chat. If little sis had just changed the date of her wedding, maybe I'd have had more time to meet the right person. And for some reason, people agreed with her. Guests who saw her post started leaving our reception to visit her at the hospital. But as if that wasn't enough, during the father-daughter dance, Lori burst in with a wheelchair, still wearing a hospital gown and visible bandages. Liam wheeled her to the front where she sobbed loudly. "Even after everything, I had to support my sister," she said in an angelic voice, as if she didn't try to accuse my husband of cheating just weeks before. Liam kept his hand gripped on her shoulder. When she moved, he'd squeeze. She'd flinch but keep smiling. That's when I spotted something even more cruel and unforgivable than breaking her ribs. Liam pulled out a candle and smirked. I caught the flicker of flame as he lit it. My hand shot up to wave at the security guard near the entrance while my other hand grabbed Miles's arm. Miles saw what was happening and moved fast, stepping between Liam and the nearest group of guests. The candle flame dipped toward the white linen tablecloth. A small orange spot appeared on the fabric edge. Then the sprinkler sensor above us started beeping. Water burst from the ceiling sprinklers in a cold spray that hit everyone. Guests screamed and jumped up from their tables. The fire alarm blared through the speakers. People started running toward the exits in their formal clothes, now soaked. I stood there in my wedding dress, watching water drip from the chandelier. The security guard reached Liam and grabbed his wrist. The candle fell to the wet floor and went out. Another guard appeared and they each took one of Liam's arms. Lori was yelling something, but I couldn't hear over the alarm. They wheeled her toward the side exit with Liam between the 2 guards. I ran after them, my wet dress heavy against my legs. The venue manager met me near the exit doors. Her face was red and she was breathing hard. I tried to explain what happened, but my voice kept breaking. She held up her hand and pulled out her phone. She told the person on the other end that we had a fire hazard situation and visible injuries on a guest. She said this crossed into criminal territory. She wanted police here now. I felt Miles's hand on my shoulder. He was soaked too, his hair dripping water down his face. The alarm finally stopped, but my ears were still ringing. The police showed up about 15 minutes later. 2 officers came through the front entrance while the venue manager was still dealing with the sprinkler system. One officer was older with gray hair. The other looked younger, maybe mid-20s. They started taking statements right away. The older officer talked to me first. I showed him the photos on my phone from earlier in the night. The bruises on Lori's arms, the black eye she tried to cover with makeup, the way she flinched when Liam touched her shoulder. I explained how Liam broke her ribs 2 days ago, how she was just discharged from the ICU this morning, how he showed up here with her in a wheelchair and then pulled out a lit candle near a tablecloth. The officer wrote everything down in a small notebook. Miles gave his statement next. Then the security guards who saw the whole thing. Several guests who witnessed Liam's behavior came forward too. One woman said she saw him squeeze Lori's shoulder so hard that Lori gasped. Another guest said Liam blocked Lori from talking to anyone who approached the wheelchair. The younger officer took photos of the burned tablecloth and the wet floor. He picked up the candle with a gloved hand and put it in a plastic bag. 2 EMTs arrived while the police were still taking statements. They went straight to Lori, who was sitting in her wheelchair near the exit. One EMT knelt down to check her vital signs. The other asked her questions about pain levels. I watched from across the room. Liam stood behind the wheelchair with both hands gripped on the handles. The EMT said something about needing to return to the hospital. Liam's voice got loud. He said she was fine. She just wanted to support her sister's wedding. The EMT stayed calm but firm. She explained that Lori was discharged too early, and the stress of tonight put her at risk. Liam argued more. His knuckles were white on the wheelchair handles. Lori kept saying she was okay. Her voice was small and shaky. But when the EMT mentioned internal bleeding, Lori's face went pale. She agreed to go back. Liam's jaw clenched. He squeezed the handles tighter. Lori flinched but kept smiling at the EMTs. She said Liam would come with her. The EMT said only family in the ambulance. Liam started to argue again, but the police officer stepped closer. Liam went quiet. Mom appeared from somewhere in the crowd. Her makeup was smeared from the sprinkler water. She said she would go with Lori to the hospital. She didn't look at me. She just walked past and got in the ambulance when it arrived. The EMTs loaded Lori's wheelchair up the ramp. The back doors closed. The ambulance drove away with its lights flashing but no siren. I stood there in the venue parking lot in my soaked wedding dress. Police officers around me. Guests leaving in wet formal wear. The happiest night of my life was supposed to be happening right now. Instead, I was giving statements about my sister's abusive husband, while my mom left without even saying goodbye. Miles put his arm around me, but I felt hollow, empty, like everything good had been sucked out of this day. Miles pulled me aside to the back hallway near the kitchen. His voice was tight. He asked if we should have just let Lori stay, let her make her scene and leave on her own. I felt my chest get tight. I told him Liam lit a fire at our wedding. Miles said he knew. He said he understood, but I could hear the frustration under his words. Our wedding became about Lori's crisis again, just like everything else for the past 6 months, just like the dress incident, the fake screenshots, the hospital posts, all of it. I wanted to defend my choice, but I was too tired. I told him I did what felt right for everyone's safety. He nodded. He said I did the right thing, but his voice sounded flat. We stood there in the hallway not talking. Water dripped from our clothes onto the floor. We walked back to the reception area. Most of the guests were gone. I counted maybe 40 people still there out of the 120 we invited. They stood in small groups talking quietly. The tables were a mess. Wet linens, knocked over centerpieces, abandoned plates of food. The venue manager walked over with a clipboard. She had papers about the fire alarm incident. Something about smoke damage even though it was just water damage. Ruined linens that needed replacing. Early shutdown penalties because we couldn't continue the reception. The numbers made my stomach hurt. $8,300 on top of everything we already paid. I felt dizzy. Miles took the papers from her. He said we would review them and get back to her. The manager's face was sympathetic but firm. She said her insurance would need documentation. Photos, police reports, everything had to be official. The police officer asked if we could come to the station to fill out an incident report. Tonight, if possible. I looked down at my wedding dress. It was supposed to be hanging in our closet as a beautiful memory. Instead, it was soaked and dirty, and I was wearing it to a police station. We drove there in Miles's car. I sat in the passenger seat watching the streets go by. Other people were out having normal Friday nights, going to dinner, seeing movies, not filing police reports on their wedding day. The station was bright and cold. Fluorescent lights, tile floors, hard plastic chairs. An officer sat with me at a desk. She was kind but matter-of-fact. She asked me to describe everything that happened. I went through it all again. The candle, the tablecloth, the sprinklers, Liam's control over Lori, the bruises, the broken ribs, the hospital discharge. She typed while I talked. She said the candle incident combined with Lori's injuries gave them grounds to investigate Liam for reckless endangerment. She said someone would follow up in the next few days. Miles filled out his own statement at another desk. I watched him write. His jaw was tight. His hand moved fast across the paper. We finally got home around 2 a.m. Miles unlocked the apartment door. Everything looked the same as when we left, but we were supposed to be at a hotel right now. starting our honeymoon. Instead, we walked into our regular apartment in wet, formal clothes. I made it to the bedroom before I started crying. Not quiet tears, big sobbing that made my whole body shake. Miles held me while I cried into his shoulder. I told him Lori destroyed everything. Our perfect day, our wedding, our reception, even our wedding night, all because she couldn't let me have June, because she had to compete, because she married a man who hurts her and brought him to our celebration. Miles didn't say anything. He just held me while I sobbed. My wedding dress left wet marks on his suit. We stood there until I couldn't cry anymore, until I was just empty and tired. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. 17 missed calls. I opened the family group chats. Messages everywhere. Camilla posted about how I made a scene, how I got police involved in private family matters, how I embarrassed Lori in front of everyone. Several relatives agreed with her. They said I should have handled it quietly. Let Lori leave with dignity. Other messages were different. My cousin asked if Lori was okay. My uncle said he was worried about her safety. Dad sent a private text asking what happened with the police. I scrolled through it all feeling sick. Half the family was mad at me for calling security. The other half was concerned about Lori but still somehow blamed me for the timing. For having my wedding in June. For forcing Lori to rush into marriage. I put the phone down. Miles was already awake next to me. He asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I didn't know what else to say. Around noon that same day, my laptop pinged with a new email. The venue manager's message sat at the top of my inbox with the subject line, Damage Assessment and Billing. I opened it with shaking hands. The breakdown listed everything in detail. Fire alarm system reset and inspection. Smoke remediation for the reception hall. Replacement linens for 6 tables. Deep cleaning of carpets and drapes. Early event termination fees. The total at the bottom made my stomach drop. $8,300. I read it 3 times hoping the number would change. Our wedding budget was already maxed out from replacing the vendors Lori sabotaged and paying for the dress cleaning after the wine incident. We had maybe $2,000 in savings left. I showed Miles the email without saying anything. He read it silently, then set the laptop down. We sat there for a long time, not talking. Finally, he pulled up our bank accounts on his phone and started doing math. He suggested we cancel the Cancun trip we had planned for next week. The honeymoon we'd been looking forward to for months. I felt my chest get tight, but I knew he was right. We needed that money now more than we needed a vacation. I told him okay, even though I wanted to cry. Lori had taken our wedding day, and now she was taking our honeymoon too. Miles squeezed my hand and said we'd reschedule when things settled down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd won somehow, that her chaos had bled into every part of our lives, and we were just letting it happen. That evening, I was scrolling through Instagram trying to distract myself when the DM notification popped up. Liam's profile picture appeared in my messages. My whole body went cold. The first message said family should stick together no matter what. The second one mentioned how I should think carefully about my choices. The third said people who betray their own blood usually regret it. Each message felt like a threat even though he never said anything directly. I screenshot every single one with my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. Then I pulled up the detective's contact information from the police report and forwarded everything to her email. I typed out a quick explanation about the messages and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Miles came into the room and asked what was wrong. I showed him the messages and watched his jaw clench. He wanted to respond, but I told him not to engage. The detective would handle it. At least I hoped she would. Mom called the next morning while I was making coffee. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying before she even said hello. She told me Lori was devastated about what happened at the reception, that everyone made her feel like a criminal when she just wanted to support her sister. I listened to her voice crack as she explained how Liam was just trying to do something romantic with the candle, how he didn't mean for the sprinklers to go off, how I embarrassed them both by calling security and involving the police. I felt sick listening to her make excuses for him, for both of them. She kept saying Lori's name like I was the one who hurt her, like I was responsible for her broken ribs and hospital stays. I tried to explain that Liam was dangerous, but Mom talked over me. She said I was being dramatic, that every couple has rough patches, that Lori knew what she was doing when she married him. Finally, I told her I had to go. I couldn't listen anymore. She was still talking when I hung up. 3 days after the reception, an unknown number called my phone. I let it go to voicemail at first because I was tired of family drama, but when I listened to the message, it was someone different. A woman named Rose Ingram who identified herself as a hospital social worker assigned to Lori's case. Her voice was calm and professional, not judgmental or emotional like everyone else. She said she was reaching out because she understood I had witnessed concerning patterns in my sister's relationship. She asked if I'd be willing to provide some background information that might help her connect Lori with appropriate resources. She emphasized that everything would be confidential, and she wasn't asking me to make decisions for Lori, just to help paint a fuller picture of the situation. Something about her tone made me feel less crazy. Like maybe I wasn't overreacting to everything that had happened. I called her back within an hour and we scheduled a time to meet. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital the next afternoon. Rose was probably in her 40s with kind eyes and a notebook. She bought her own coffee and didn't make small talk. Just got right into explaining what she did and why she wanted to talk to me. She said family members often see warning signs that victims minimize or hide, that my observations could help her understand the full scope of what Lori was dealing with. She asked me to walk through what I'd witnessed over the past few months. The shove Mom saw, the bruises in photos, the broken ribs, the way Liam gripped Lori's shoulder at the reception. I told her everything I could remember while she took notes. She didn't seem shocked or surprised by any of it. When I finished, she explained the basics of domestic violence dynamics. How abusers isolate their victims. How victims often defend their abusers. How leaving is a process that takes time. She made it clear she couldn't force Lori to accept help, but she wanted Lori to know resources existed when she was ready. She said my role was just to be a safe contact point, not to rescue or fix anything, just to document what I saw and stay available. It was the first conversation about Lori's situation that didn't make me feel guilty or responsible for everything. That night around 11, my phone buzzed with a long text from Lori. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me open it. The message was all over the place. She blamed me for rushing her into marriage by refusing to change my wedding date, said I forced her to settle for someone she barely knew just so she could have her June wedding. But then the tone shifted. She admitted she was scared of Liam's temper, that sometimes he got angry over nothing and she didn't know how to calm him down. She said she felt trapped, but didn't know what to do about it. The whole message mixed blame with vulnerability in a way that made my chest ache. I remembered what Rose said about documenting everything, so I took screenshots of the entire conversation even though it felt wrong to treat my sister's pain like evidence. I forwarded them to Rose's email with a note about when I received them. Then I put my phone on silent and tried not to think about how messed up everything had become. The detective called the following week asking me to come to the station for a formal witness statement. She said the candle incident combined with the threatening messages gave them enough to investigate Liam for reckless endangerment. She needed me to provide an official account of what happened at the reception. I scheduled it for the next Tuesday, even though the idea of making everything official made me anxious. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a criminal investigation. I kept thinking about Lori defending him, about Mom making excuses, about how half the family would probably hate me for going through with this. But I also thought about everyone at that reception who could have gotten hurt, about the sprinklers and the smoke and the panic, about Lori's broken ribs and black eye, about the grip on her shoulder. I told the detective I'd be there. That same afternoon, Camilla posted on Facebook a long rant about family loyalty and keeping private matters private. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who she meant. She talked about how some people tear families apart by involving outsiders in personal business, how the police have no place in family disagreements, how certain people need to learn that airing dirty laundry publicly only makes things worse. I watched the post get likes and shares from relatives I'd known my whole life, cousins commenting with agreement, aunts adding their own complaints about young people these days. Each notification felt like another person choosing Lori's side, choosing to ignore what was actually happening because it was uncomfortable to acknowledge. I felt more alone than I had since this whole thing started. Miles found me staring at my phone with tears running down my face. He took it away and held me while I cried, but even his comfort couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing my entire family over trying to do the right thing. Miles and I had our first real fight 2 days later. I was checking my phone constantly, refreshing Facebook to see new comments on Camilla's post, watching for texts from Lori or Mom or the detective, scrolling through Instagram looking for updates. He finally snapped while we were trying to watch a movie, asked if I could please just put the phone down for 1 hour. I got defensive, told him I needed to stay informed about what was happening. He said the family drama was consuming our entire newlywed period, that we'd been married less than 2 weeks and I'd spent more time on my phone than talking to him. I felt my face get hot, started to argue back, but then I saw the hurt in his eyes and realized he was right. We'd postponed our honeymoon, spent our wedding night at a police station, used our savings to pay for damage, and now I was letting Lori's crisis take over every moment we had left. He apologized almost immediately, said he knew this was hard and he wasn't trying to make me feel worse. Then he suggested we find a couples therapist, someone who could help us process everything that happened and figure out how to move forward together. I agreed, even though part of me felt like we shouldn't need therapy after 2 weeks of marriage. But nothing about our situation was normal, and maybe that was exactly why we needed help. I found a therapist who took our insurance and scheduled an appointment for the following week. The woman on the phone asked what we needed help with, and I stumbled over my words trying to explain. Family trauma, I finally said. Wedding stress. She penciled us in for Thursday at 6. Work became harder to focus on. My boss, Jennifer, stopped by my desk on Tuesday morning with a concerned look on her face. She asked if I wanted to take some extended leave since I'd been distracted and emotional since returning from my wedding week. I assured her I was managing fine, that I just needed a few more days to get back into my routine. She nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. She mentioned that I'd missed 2 deadlines and seemed to zone out during meetings. I apologized and promised to do better, but inside I felt my professional stability shaking as the personal crisis bled into every area of my life. I couldn't stop checking my phone for updates. I refreshed my email constantly. Every notification made my heart jump. That evening, Miles's parents called. His mom, Sandra, did most of the talking, while his dad, Rick, occasionally added comments in the background. They expressed their disappointment about how the wedding turned out. Sandra said they understood family could be complicated, but maybe we should have handled things privately instead of involving the authorities. She used that careful tone people use when they're trying not to sound judgmental, but definitely are. I felt myself getting defensive. I explained that Liam had created a fire hazard that endangered everyone at the reception, that Lori had visible injuries and was clearly in danger. Sandra made a sympathetic noise, but then said something about how police involvement just makes everything more complicated. Rick chimed in to say that family matters should stay within the family. I felt hurt that even my in-laws didn't fully understand why we had to prioritize safety over appearances. Miles took the phone from me and told his parents we'd talk to them later. He hung up before they could respond. The next morning, my phone rang while I was getting ready for work. It was Mom, and her voice sounded thick like she'd been crying. She asked if we could talk about Lori. I sat down on the edge of the bed, already bracing myself. Mom took a shaky breath and then told me something I'd never known. She said Lori's obsession with June actually stemmed from our grandmother dying in June when Lori was 12. Grandma had been Lori's favorite person in the world. After she died, Lori fixated on reclaiming the month as something beautiful instead of sad. She started collecting things with the word June on them. She only dated guys with June in their names or birthdays in June. She planned her entire future wedding around the month. Mom said she'd always hoped Lori would grow out of it, but instead it just got stronger over the years. The context didn't excuse Lori's behavior, but it helped me understand the depth of her irrationality about the wedding timing. I felt a wave of sadness for my sister, for the 12-year-old girl who lost her grandmother and never really processed it. But I also felt frustrated that no one had ever told me this before, that I'd been expected to just accommodate Lori's fixation without understanding where it came from. After I hung up with Mom, I opened the family group chat. I stared at it for a long time, reading back through old messages. Then I started typing. I drafted a clear message stating that anyone who maintained contact with Liam needed to respect that I would not be in spaces where he was present or discussed. I said I loved my family, but I had a right to feel safe. I said this wasn't about choosing sides, it was about boundaries. My finger hovered over the send button for several minutes. Finally, I pressed it. The responses came quickly. Several relatives reacted with angry emojis. Camilla sent a long paragraph about how I was dividing the family. My uncle posted a gif of someone rolling their eyes. But a few people messaged me privately with support. My cousin Maya said she understood. My aunt on Dad's side said she'd been worried about Liam from the start. It wasn't everyone, but it was something. 2 days later, a delivery person showed up at our apartment with a huge bouquet of white roses. Miles signed for them while I was in the shower. When I came out, he was standing in the kitchen staring at the flowers with a strange expression. He handed me the card. It said, "Family should forgive family," in printed letters. No signature, but I knew immediately they were from Liam. The message felt more threatening than apologetic, like a warning disguised as a peace offering. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the flowers from multiple angles. I photographed the card, front and back. I photographed the delivery receipt that Miles had left on the counter. Then I threw the flowers in the dumpster outside our building and added all the documentation to the growing file I was keeping. Everything went into a folder on my computer labeled Evidence. Thursday came and Miles and I drove to the therapist's office in silence. The building was in a medical complex near the hospital. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor and checked in with the receptionist. The waiting room had uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. A few minutes later, a man in his 40s came out and introduced himself as Cyrus. He had a calm voice and wore glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He led us back to his office and gestured for us to sit on a small couch. I felt defensive immediately, like I needed to explain why we were there after only being married 2 weeks. But Cyrus just asked us to tell him what brought us in. Miles looked at me and I started talking. I told him about Lori's competition over the wedding month, about the sabotage attempts and the rushed marriage to Liam, about the abuse and the hospital and the reception disaster, about the family taking sides and the police involvement and the constant crisis management. I talked for probably 15 minutes straight while Cyrus listened and took occasional notes. When I finally stopped, he asked me how long I'd been trying to rescue Lori. The question caught me off guard. He said he noticed I'd spent a lot of time describing my sister's choices and my attempts to help her, but very little time talking about my own needs or feelings. He asked if I'd always felt responsible for Lori's happiness. I felt my throat get tight. Miles reached over and took my hand. Cyrus helped us identify how my longtime role as Lori's rescuer had shaped my responses to her choices, how I'd been conditioned since childhood to manage her emotions and fix her problems, how our parents had often put that responsibility on me because I was the stable one. The session went by quickly. Near the end, Cyrus asked me to think about something for next time. He wanted me to consider what it would mean to let Lori face the consequences of her own decisions without trying to save her, to separate my sister's well-being from my own sense of worth. It was a hard question, and I didn't have an answer. We scheduled another appointment for the following week. On the drive home, Miles asked how I was feeling. I admitted that part of me had always felt responsible for Lori's happiness, that her self-destructive competition triggered my guilt, even when I knew intellectually it wasn't my fault. Miles squeezed my hand and said that wasn't fair to me, that I couldn't live my life trying to prevent Lori from making bad choices. That evening, I got a call from the detective handling the candle incident. He said the venue manager had provided security footage and damaged documentation that corroborated our account. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. There was objective evidence beyond just witness statements and my own documentation. The detective said he'd be forwarding everything to the district attorney's office for review. He thought they'd likely file charges for reckless endangerment given the fire hazard and the number of people who could have been hurt. I thanked him and hung up feeling lighter than I had in days. The next morning, Rose called me. She said she'd attempted another conversation with Lori about safety planning. This time, Lori had engaged slightly instead of shutting down completely. She'd asked a few questions about what resources existed. She'd admitted she was scared sometimes. Rose was careful not to give me false hope. She explained that small openings mattered in domestic violence situations, but they didn't guarantee that someone was ready to leave. She said victims often test the waters multiple times before taking action. I appreciated her honesty, even though part of me wanted her to say Lori was definitely going to be okay. That same afternoon, Mom called me in a whisper. She said Liam had confiscated Lori's phone and was monitoring all her communications. She'd seen him go through Lori's messages and delete some of them. She'd heard him question Lori about who she'd been talking to. I felt my stomach drop with fear for my sister's safety. I called Rose back immediately and told her what Mom had said. Rose explained this was a classic escalation pattern in abusive relationships. When abusers feel like they're losing control, they often increase their monitoring and isolation tactics. She said it meant Liam was feeling threatened by Lori's conversations with her and with me, that he was trying to cut off her access to support. Rose asked if Mom would be willing to provide Lori with a prepaid phone that Liam didn't know about, something Lori could hide and use to reach out if she needed help. I said I'd ask Mom, but I wasn't sure she'd be willing to go behind Liam's back like that. Rose said to let her know either way, that they'd figure out other options if needed. That evening, I pulled out an old gym bag from the back of our closet and started filling it with everything Rose had suggested. I went to the ATM and withdrew $300 in 20s, tucking them into a zippered pocket. I made copies of Lori's birth certificate, social security card, and driver's license from the files Mom had given me years ago when I helped Lori apply for her passport. I added a prepaid phone card, a list of domestic violence hotlines Rose had emailed me, and the address of the nearest shelter. I packed a change of clothes in Lori's size, basic toiletries, and a phone charger. The bag felt heavy in my hands as I zipped it closed and shoved it under our bed behind some storage boxes. It felt weird to be planning for something I couldn't control, like I was waiting for a disaster I desperately hoped would never come. But Rose had been clear that this was the most helpful thing family members could do, having resources ready so victims didn't have to think about logistics in a crisis moment. 2 days later, Dad called me during my lunch break at work. He wanted to arrange a family meeting to clear the air about everything that had happened. I took a deep breath and told him I'd only attend if Liam was explicitly not invited, and everyone agreed to respect that boundary. Dad went quiet for a moment, then said he'd make that clear to everyone. Over the next few hours, my phone buzzed with angry messages from various relatives. Camilla sent a long text about how I was being divisive and controlling. My uncle refused to come if we were going to exclude family members. A cousin I barely talked to posted in a family group chat about how I was tearing everyone apart. By the evening, it was clear that only about half the family would attend under my conditions. The split felt painful and visible, like watching relationships crack apart in real time. The meeting happened on Saturday afternoon at Mom and Dad's house. I arrived with Miles, my stomach tight with nerves. About 15 relatives were scattered around the living room and dining room, way fewer than the 30+ who usually showed up for family gatherings. The atmosphere felt tense and awkward. Then Lori walked in and my heart sank. I hadn't expected her to come. She wore a long-sleeved shirt despite the summer heat, and I could see the edge of a bruise on her wrist when she reached for a glass of water. Dad started by saying we needed to talk openly about concerns for Lori's safety. Lori immediately cut him off and said everyone was overreacting. She insisted Liam loved her, and that relationships just looked different from the outside. When Mom gently brought up the broken ribs and the black eye, Lori laughed it off and said, accidents happen in every marriage. She turned to me and said this whole situation was my fault for making such a big deal out of the wedding. If I had just changed my date like she asked, she would have had time to meet someone better, someone who didn't have such a temper. I felt my face get hot but forced myself to stay calm. I said I loved her and wanted her to be safe, but I also had a right to set boundaries about who I felt safe around. I said Liam's behavior at our reception had crossed a line, and I wouldn't be in spaces where he was present. Lori rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. Several relatives nodded in agreement with her. The meeting ended with nothing resolved, just more tension and more people taking sides. The following week, I took a personal day from work and drove to the courthouse downtown. I'd printed out the forms for a temporary protective order and filled them out the night before, my hands shaking as I wrote down each threatening message Liam had sent. The clerk at the window was matter-of-fact and professional, processing my paperwork without much reaction. I had to provide documentation, so I handed over printed screenshots of Liam's Instagram messages, photos from the reception showing him with the candle, and the police report from that night. Sitting in the waiting area afterward, I felt guilty and strange. I was taking legal action against my sister's husband. Part of me worried I was overreacting, making things worse, causing more problems. I called Rose from my car before driving home. She listened to my concerns and then reminded me firmly that I had a right to safety. She said protective orders existed for exactly this reason, when someone's behavior made you legitimately afraid. Her voice was calm and steady, and by the time we hung up, I felt a little less guilty about what I'd done. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Instagram during a break at work when I saw that Liam had posted a long statement. He didn't mention me by name, but wrote about betrayal and family loyalty and how some people turned their backs when things got hard. The post had dozens of comments from his friends, all supportive, all agreeing that families should stick together no matter what. I watched my own social circles split in real time. Some people who'd been at our wedding commented with supportive messages for Liam, Others messaged me privately to say they understood why I'd taken action. A few mutual friends unfollowed me entirely. I felt sick watching it all unfold, seeing people I thought knew me well suddenly treating me like I was the problem. I screenshot everything and added it to my documentation file, but the damage to my social connections felt real and painful. At our next therapy appointment, Cyrus noticed immediately that I was distracted. I admitted I'd been checking social media and family group chats constantly, refreshing every few minutes to see what people were saying. He asked how that was helping me, and I realized it wasn't. It was just making me more anxious and upset. Together, we established a new boundary where I'd only check messages twice daily, once in the morning and once in the evening. The rest of the time, my phone would stay on Do Not Disturb, except for calls from my immediate family and Rose. Cyrus helped me see that I was using constant monitoring as a way to feel in control, but it was actually just feeding my anxiety. He suggested I focus on documentation rather than emotional engagement. I could screenshot concerning posts for my records without reading every comment or reaction. It felt hard to commit to, but I knew he was right. The next afternoon, the venue manager called with an update about the damages from our reception. His insurance company had reviewed the police report and security footage and agreed to cover a significant portion of the smoke remediation and ruined linens. Our responsibility dropped from over $8,000 to around $4,000. It was still a lot of money, but it felt manageable with our combined income. I thanked him multiple times, feeling a wave of relief that at least this one aspect of the disaster was getting slightly better. Miles and I could handle $4,000 over time. The original amount had felt crushing. Rose called me a few days later with cautiously good news. She said Lori had asked her some hypothetical questions about domestic violence shelters and safety planning during their last conversation. Rose was careful not to give me false hope. She explained that asking questions didn't mean Lori was ready to leave, but it did mean she was thinking about her options. She said this was actually a positive sign, even though Lori hadn't committed to anything concrete. I felt a small surge of hope mixed with frustration. I wanted to call Lori immediately and tell her to leave, to offer to pick her up right now, to fix everything. But Rose had been clear that pressure often backfired. Lori needed to make this decision on her own timeline, and all I could do was make sure she knew resources existed when she was ready. One evening about a week later, Miles came into the kitchen looking tense. He said he'd just spotted Liam's car parked down the street from our apartment complex. I felt my stomach drop. We immediately called the police and waited by the window. It took almost 40 minutes for an officer to arrive, and by then Liam's car was gone. The officer took our statement and wrote down the license plate number Miles had memorized. He explained that without a granted protective order yet, they couldn't do much about someone parking on a public street. But he said the report would help establish a pattern of behavior. He suggested we document any future sightings with photos if possible. After he left, Miles and I double-checked all our locks and closed all the curtains. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound outside. My protective order hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday morning. I took another day off work and dressed carefully in professional clothes, wanting to be taken seriously. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with just the judge, a clerk, and a few other people waiting for their cases. When my name was called, I walked up to the front with my folder of documentation. The judge asked me to explain why I was requesting the order. I told her about the candle incident at our reception, about the threatening messages Liam had sent, about him driving past our apartment. I showed her the police reports, the screenshots, the photos. My voice shook a little, but I kept going, explaining that I was genuinely afraid for my safety based on his pattern of behavior. The judge looked through my documentation carefully, asking a few clarifying questions. Then she granted a 6-month protective order with clear stay-away provisions. Liam had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, Miles, our home, and my workplace. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the judge signed the order. Walking out of the courthouse, I noticed that Lori wasn't there. She'd chosen not to file for her own protection, even though she needed it far more than I did. That hurt in a way I couldn't quite name, knowing my sister was still in danger while I'd just gotten legal protection from her husband. 2 days later, I was making coffee in our kitchen when my phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end introduced herself as someone from the district attorney's office and asked if I had a few minutes to talk about the incident at my wedding reception. My hands started shaking, so I put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter. She explained that after reviewing the police report, witness statements, and security footage from the venue, they were moving forward with misdemeanor reckless endangerment charges against Liam. The candle incident, combined with the fire alarm activation and the number of guests who were put at risk, gave them enough evidence to prosecute. I felt this weird mix of relief and fear wash over me. Someone in an official position was actually taking this seriously and saying that what Liam did was wrong and dangerous. The prosecutor asked if I'd be willing to testify if the case went to trial, and I said yes, even though my voice came out shaky. After I hung up, I just stood there staring at my coffee maker, trying to process that this was really happening. Miles came into the kitchen and I told him about the call. He pulled me into a hug and said this was a good thing, that Liam needed to face real consequences for his actions. Over the next week, my phone started buzzing less and less with messages from certain family members. At first, I thought people were just busy, but then I realized some relatives had actually blocked me or removed me from their social media. Camilla, my aunt who'd been so vocal about me tearing the family apart, sent me one final text message that made my stomach hurt to read. She wrote that I'd destroyed this family by refusing to just change my wedding date in the first place, and now I was pressing charges against Liam like some vindictive person who couldn't let things go. She said she couldn't be around someone who caused this much pain and division, and that she was done trying to maintain a relationship with me. The message ended with her saying she hoped I was happy now that I'd gotten my way and torn everyone apart. I read it 3 times, then screenshot it and saved it to my documentation folder, even though doing that made me feel sick. I'd lost my relationship with Camilla, and based on the radio silence from several cousins and my uncle, I'd lost those connections too. I kept telling myself that protecting my safety was worth losing people who didn't respect my boundaries, but that didn't make it hurt less. These were people I'd grown up with, people who'd been at my childhood birthday parties and family holidays. Now they were just gone because I wouldn't let my sister's husband endanger everyone at my wedding without consequences. About 10 days after the protective order hearing, I was at work trying to focus on a project deadline when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message was short and simple. It just said the word butterfly followed by thinking about things. My heart jumped into my throat because butterfly was the code word Rose had helped Lori and me establish during one of our conversations. It meant Lori was reaching out independently, using someone else's phone, and she was okay enough to make contact. I wanted so badly to text back immediately, to ask her a million questions, to beg her to leave Liam right now. But Rose had been super clear that I shouldn't respond directly to these coded messages because it might put Lori at risk if Liam checked the phone she borrowed. The whole point was just to let me know she was thinking about her options and maintaining some thread of independent communication. I saved the number and took a screenshot, then just sat there at my desk feeling this surge of protective warmth mixed with frustration. My sister was still trapped with someone who'd broken her ribs and sent her to the ICU, but at least she was thinking about leaving. At least she remembered the code word and knew she could reach out. I texted Rose instead to let her know I'd received the coded message, and she responded quickly saying this was actually a positive sign, even though Lori hadn't committed to anything concrete. Rose called me the next evening to talk about logistics for a potential safety plan if Lori decided to leave. She explained that I should only help with practical support like having a spare key to my apartment, keeping some cash available, or being ready to pick Lori up if she called. But she was really clear that I shouldn't pressure Lori or try to rescue her, because that often backfires and pushes abuse survivors back toward their abusers. Rose said the most important thing was respecting Lori's timeline and agency, even though it was painful to watch her stay in danger. We went through a checklist of things I could prepare in advance, like making sure my phone was always charged, having a bag ready with basic supplies Lori might need, and knowing the addresses of the nearest domestic violence shelters. Every item on the list made this feel more real and more scary. I kept wanting to just call Lori and tell her to leave now, to fix everything and make her safe immediately. But Rose reminded me that Lori had to make this decision on her own terms, and the average abuse survivor leaves 7 times before staying gone permanently. My job wasn't to force the timeline, but to make sure Lori knew help existed when she was ready. After we hung up, I put together a small bag with toiletries, clean clothes in Lori's size, some snacks, and $200 in cash. I hid it in the back of my closet where Miles and I could access it quickly if needed. A few days later, Miles and I were sitting on our couch scrolling through photos from our wedding reception, and I started crying, looking at all the pictures that got ruined by Lori's dramatic entrance and Liam's candle stunt. Miles put his arm around me and said, "Maybe we should do something to reclaim our wedding experience. Something that was just about us without all the family drama and trauma." We started planning a small private vow exchange ceremony with just our closest friends, maybe 8 or 10 people total. We'd keep it simple and intimate, just exchange the vows we'd actually written for each other, but never got to say at our reception because of all the chaos. We could do it in our apartment or at a small park, somewhere meaningful to us where we could focus on our commitment instead of worrying about family drama exploding. Planning this made me feel lighter than I had in weeks. It felt healing to think about celebrating our marriage in a space that was protected and intentional, where the focus would be on Miles and me instead of managing Lori's crisis. We picked a date 3 weeks out and started texting our closest friends to see who could make it. Almost everyone said yes immediately, and several of them mentioned they'd been hoping we'd do something like this to get a real celebration after what happened at the reception. 2 weeks after the protective order was granted, I was getting ready for bed when Miles called me over to the window. He'd spotted Liam's car parked down the street from our apartment complex again, the 3rd time in 4 days. We immediately called the police, and this time I made sure to mention the active protective order and the previous reports we'd filed. The dispatcher said officers were on their way and to stay inside with the doors locked. We waited by the window watching Liam's car, and this time I took photos with my phone, making sure to capture the license plate and timestamp. About 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up and officers approached Liam's vehicle. We watched them talk to him, check his identification, and then put him in handcuffs. One officer came up to our apartment afterward to let us know they were arresting Liam for violating the protective order, since we had documentation of him driving past our complex multiple times, despite the stay-away provisions. The officer said he'd be held until a bail hearing, which would probably happen within 24 to 48 hours. I felt this weird combination of relief that he was actually being held accountable, and apprehension because I knew this would make him even angrier at me. Miles and I barely slept that night, jumping at every small sound outside even though we knew Liam was in custody. Liam made bail 2 days later, and that same evening Rose called me with news that made my chest hurt. She said Lori had wavered after Liam got out and he'd convinced her to take him back by promising to change and attend anger management classes. Rose's voice was calm and professional as she explained this was a completely normal pattern in domestic violence situations, and it didn't mean Lori wouldn't eventually leave permanently. She said most survivors go through multiple cycles of leaving and returning before they're able to stay gone, and each attempt builds their confidence and awareness, even if it doesn't stick right away. I felt heartbroken listening to this. Knowing my sister was back in that apartment with someone who'd put her in the ICU and who'd just been arrested for stalking me. But Rose kept emphasizing that I couldn't control Lori's choices, and putting pressure on her would likely push her further toward Liam. All I could do was maintain my boundaries, keep myself safe, and make sure Lori knew resources existed when she was ready. After I hung up, I cried on Miles's shoulder for probably 20 minutes, feeling helpless and scared for my sister. 3 days later, Mom called me in the middle of the afternoon sounding different from usual, more firm and determined. She said she'd made a decision and wanted to tell me before she told anyone else. She'd informed Liam that he was no longer welcome in her home, regardless of whether Lori chose to stay with him or not. If Lori wanted to visit, she was always welcome, but Liam couldn't come with her, and Mom wouldn't attend any events where he was present. I felt surprised and this cautious sense of pride hearing her say this. Mom had struggled so much with enabling Lori's choices and trying to keep peace in the family, but she was actually setting a real boundary now. I knew it was painful for her because it might mean seeing Lori less often, but she was choosing safety over maintaining appearances. Mom's voice got a little shaky as she said she couldn't watch Lori get hurt anymore and couldn't pretend Liam was a safe person to have around. I thanked her for telling me and for taking this step, and we talked for a few more minutes about how hard it was to love someone while respecting their choices, even when those choices were dangerous. Miles and I had our next therapy session with Cyrus the following week, and I spent most of it crying about how angry I was that our wedding and honeymoon got completely derailed by Lori's crisis. I'd been holding this resentment inside, feeling guilty for being mad about my ruined wedding when my sister was in an abusive relationship, but Cyrus said both things could be true at the same time. I could be heartbroken about Lori's situation, and also legitimately angry that our special day got destroyed. Miles opened up too, saying he'd been frustrated that we couldn't just enjoy being newlyweds because we were constantly managing family drama and safety concerns. Cyrus helped us acknowledge the real loss we'd experienced, the wedding and honeymoon we'd planned and paid for but never got to enjoy. Then he guided us toward creating new traditions and slowing down our pace of life to actually focus on our marriage instead of the crisis surrounding us. We decided we'd have a weekly date night where we didn't discuss Lori or family drama at all, just focused on each other and building our life together. It felt good to have permission to grieve what we'd lost while also actively choosing to prioritize our relationship going forward. Rose called me again about a week and a half later with an update that made me feel both hopeful and sad at the same time. She said Lori had actually stayed one night in a domestic violence shelter before going back to Liam, but the important part was that she'd kept Rose's contact information and now knew the shelter existed and how to access it. Rose emphasized that leaving an abusive relationship was a process, not a single event, and this overnight stay was still real progress even though Lori went back. She explained that many survivors need to test out leaving multiple times before they're psychologically ready to stay gone permanently. Each time they leave, even briefly, they're building their confidence and proving to themselves that they can survive outside the relationship. Lori knowing where the shelter was, having Rose's number saved, and having actually spent a night there meant she had concrete evidence that leaving was possible. I hung up feeling this complicated mix of emotions, wanting to celebrate that Lori had taken even this small step, while also being terrified that she'd gone back to someone who could kill her. But I was starting to understand, slowly and painfully, that I couldn't control Lori's timeline or choices, and all I could do was make sure she knew help existed whenever she was ready to accept it. About 2 weeks after that shelter stay, our insurance company finally got back to us about the wedding venue damages. They reviewed the police report and all the security footage from that night, and after what felt like endless back-and-forth paperwork, they agreed to cover most of the fire alarm incident and smoke damage costs. The final amount we owed dropped from over $8,000 down to around $2,500, which still hurt our savings but felt way more manageable with both our incomes combined. Miles and I sat at our kitchen table going over the adjusted invoice, and I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders knowing we could actually handle this without going into debt. Dad called me that same week saying he wanted to try something different with the family communication situation. He created a brand new group chat with very clear rules posted right at the top, the main one being that Liam could not be discussed or defended by anyone, and if someone violated that rule, they would be removed immediately with no second chances. He sent out invitations to everyone in the family explaining the boundaries, and I watched as people either joined or didn't respond at all. About half the family ended up in that new chat, which made it way smaller than our original family group, but the people who joined actually respected my boundaries and didn't try to guilt-trip me about Lori's choices. It felt weird having this split family dynamic, but also kind of peaceful not constantly defending myself in group messages anymore. Then the district attorney's office contacted me with news about Liam's criminal case for the candle incident at our reception. His lawyer had been negotiating with the prosecutor, and they reached a plea deal where Liam pled guilty to misdemeanor reckless endangerment. The deal included 2 years probation, mandatory domestic violence intervention programming that would last 6 months, and he had to maintain all the stay-away orders that were already in place. I read through the terms feeling frustrated that the consequences weren't harsher, given how dangerous his behavior was. But the prosecutor explained this was pretty typical for first-time misdemeanor offenses, and at least it got him into the intervention program without a long trial. I signed off on the plea agreement even though part of me wanted to push for more, accepting that this was just how the legal system worked in these situations. Rose called me again a few days later with an update that actually made me feel hopeful for the first time in weeks. She said she had been working with Lori to set up a counseling intake appointment at a specialized domestic violence agency, and Lori had actually shown up for the appointment and agreed to start weekly sessions with a counselor there. Rose was really careful not to share any details about what Lori discussed in counseling, because of confidentiality rules, but she confirmed that Lori was actively engaging with the services and had worked with her counselor to establish that safety code system with family members we had talked about before. Knowing Lori was finally getting professional help and had that emergency contact system in place made me feel like maybe things could actually get better over time. Miles and I decided we wanted to do something positive to celebrate our marriage after all the chaos and trauma of the actual wedding reception. We planned a small backyard gathering at our apartment complex, just inviting the family members and close friends who had consistently supported us through everything, without making us feel guilty or taking sides. We set up string lights in the shared courtyard area, ordered a bunch of food from our favorite restaurants, and kept everything super casual and low-key. It felt really good to celebrate our marriage in this intimate setting, without all the pressure and drama that had destroyed our reception, just surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us and wanted us to be happy. Everyone brought cards and small gifts, and we spent the evening laughing and talking without anyone mentioning Lori or Liam or any of the family conflict. About a week after our gathering, my phone rang with Lori's number, and I almost didn't answer, but decided to pick up. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and she didn't apologize for any of the wedding sabotage or the reception disaster, but she did say that things had gotten out of hand with the whole wedding competition situation. Her voice sounded tired and a little bit embarrassed, though she didn't directly take responsibility for her choices. It wasn't the full accountability and apology I wished I could hear from her, but I recognized it as a small step forward and didn't push her for more than she was ready to give right now. I told her I was glad she was going to counseling and that I hoped it helped her, and we ended the call without any fighting or blame. Miles and I had our next therapy session with Cyrus the following week, and I spent most of it talking about my complicated feelings about Lori and our relationship. Cyrus helped me work through my grief about the sister relationship I had always wished for versus the reality of who Lori actually is and what she's capable of right now. He said it was possible to maintain boundaries while still holding space for the possibility that Lori might change and grow over time, and that I didn't have to choose between completely cutting her off or letting her walk all over me. I was learning that relationships could exist in this middle ground where I protected myself, but didn't close the door entirely on future healing. Mom texted me asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. Just the two of us, and I agreed, even though I felt nervous about what she might say. We sat in a quiet corner of a local cafe, and she admitted something I had never expected to hear from her. She said she had enabled Lori's behavior for years out of guilt about the favoritism she had shown me growing up, always giving me more attention and praise while being harder on Lori. She told me she realized she had been trying to make up for that old guilt by excusing Lori's actions now, even when those actions were clearly wrong and hurtful. We didn't resolve everything in that one conversation, and there were still tensions and disagreements between us, but having her actually acknowledge the family dynamics and her own role in them felt like really important progress. A few weeks later, the domestic violence agency where Lori was receiving counseling services sent out an invitation to family members for an educational session about supporting survivors of abuse. Mom, Dad, and I all attended together, sitting in a conference room with maybe 15 other family members of survivors. The counselor leading the session taught us about trauma bonding, the cycle of abuse, and explained that research shows victims return to their abusers an average of 7 times before leaving permanently. Learning that Lori going back to Liam after the shelter stay was actually a normal part of the process helped me feel less frustrated and more patient with her timeline. They gave us resources and strategies for staying supportive without enabling, and I left feeling more equipped to handle whatever came next. Then something good finally happened that had nothing to do with family drama or crisis management. Miles came home from work one evening with this huge smile on his face, and he told me his boss had offered him a promotion to senior analyst with a significant salary increase. The extra money would ease so much of our financial stress from all the wedding expenses and legal fees, and give us breathing room to start saving again for the future we wanted. We celebrated quietly with dinner at home that night, just the two of us cooking together and talking about what this meant for our lives. After months of constant crisis and stress and family conflict, it felt amazing to have something positive happen, something that was just about us and our life together moving forward. 2 weeks later, Rose called me with an update that Lori had finished her 8-week domestic violence counseling program at the agency. She told me Lori was showing better awareness about safety planning and recognizing warning signs, which felt like real progress even though she was still living with Liam in their apartment. Rose explained that Lori was learning coping strategies and had developed a more detailed escape plan with emergency contacts and a packed bag hidden at Mom's house. I thanked Rose for the update and admitted I was struggling to accept that Lori's healing wouldn't follow the timeline I wanted for her. Rose reminded me gently that leaving an abusive relationship was a process that could take years, not weeks, and that my job was to maintain my boundaries while staying a safe person Lori could reach out to when ready. A few days after that conversation, I received a thick envelope in the mail from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a formal letter from Liam's attorney, along with a handwritten apology statement that Liam had written as part of his court-ordered intervention program. The letter went on for 2 pages about how he took full responsibility for his actions and understood the harm he caused, but the whole thing felt rehearsed and fake, like he was just checking boxes to satisfy his probation requirements. I read through it once, felt absolutely nothing except mild disgust, and then filed it in the folder with all my other documentation about the protective order and police reports. I didn't respond or acknowledge receiving it because Rose had helped me understand that maintaining my boundary of 0 direct contact with Liam was more important than being polite. The following weekend, Miles surprised me by booking us a long weekend trip to a small beach town about 3 hours away, our scaled-down version of the honeymoon we had postponed after the wedding disaster. We drove down on Friday morning with the windows open and music playing, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe without constantly checking my phone for family crisis updates. We spent 3 days walking on the beach, eating seafood at local restaurants and sleeping in late without any schedule or obligations. It felt healing to focus entirely on each other and our marriage without the constant background noise of domestic violence, crisis management, and family drama. On our last morning there, we sat on the hotel balcony drinking coffee, and Miles told me he felt like he was finally getting to know me as his wife, instead of as someone perpetually managing her sister's chaos. When we got back home, Dad called to tell me that Liam had moved out of Lori's apartment temporarily to stay with his parents while he finished the last few weeks of his intervention program. Dad said this was giving Lori some actual physical space for the first time since they got married, and he thought it might help her think more clearly about what she wanted. I immediately texted Rose to ask if she knew about this development, and she confirmed that Lori was using the separation time to strengthen her safety plan and continue her counseling sessions without Liam monitoring her every move. Rose said Lori seemed more engaged in therapy without the daily stress of living with him, though she was still extremely anxious about making any permanent decisions. A month later, I got a call from the prosecutor's office informing me that my protective order against Liam was set to expire in 6 months. The prosecutor also confirmed that Liam had successfully completed all his probation terms and intervention programming without any violations or missed appointments. I felt skeptical about whether a few months of anger management classes could actually change someone who broke his wife's ribs, but I had to accept that this was how the legal system worked and that he had technically met all the requirements. The prosecutor explained that I could request an extension of the protective order if I had evidence of new threatening behavior, but otherwise it would expire automatically, and I would need to rely on other boundaries to maintain my safety. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Lori asking if we could meet for coffee to talk. I stared at the message for a long time before responding that I would agree to meet at a public coffee shop near my apartment with a clear 1-hour time limit. When I arrived at the cafe, Lori was already sitting at a corner table looking thinner than I remembered, and wearing a sweater despite the warm weather. She told me she was staying separated from Liam for now and working with Rose on whether to make the separation permanent or try to reconcile. I listened without offering advice or opinions, just letting her talk through her confusion and fear. She didn't apologize for the wedding disasters or the social media posts or any of the chaos she had caused, but she did thank me quietly for not giving up on her completely even after everything. I told her I loved her and wanted her to be safe, but that I also needed to maintain boundaries to protect myself and my marriage. We talked for exactly 1 hour, and then I stood up to leave and Lori hugged me tightly before walking to her car alone. Thanksgiving arrived a few weeks later, and Mom organized a family dinner with just the relatives who had respected boundaries throughout this entire crisis. Lori attended without Liam for the first time since their wedding, sitting quietly at the table and helping Mom in the kitchen. The gathering was much smaller than our usual Thanksgiving with maybe 15 people instead of 30, and there was still obvious tension when certain topics came up. But it felt like a foundation we could actually build on as everyone continued their individual growth and healing work. Looking back now on these 13 weeks since that chaotic wedding reception, I can see how far we've all come, even though the journey has been exhausting and painful. The legal protections are in place with the protective order and Liam's probation conditions. I'm maintaining healthy boundaries while staying a safe contact person for Lori when she needs support. Miles and I are stronger as a couple through our weekly therapy sessions and intentional focus on our relationship. Mom finally set real limits by telling Liam he's not welcome in her home regardless of Lori's choices. And Lori is actively engaged in counseling with a detailed safety plan and support system in place. It's not the fairy tale ending I once imagined when Miles and I announced our engagement, but it's real progress toward everyone being safer and healthier. I'm learning slowly that sometimes the best outcome isn't a perfect resolution, but simply creating conditions where healing becomes possible over time. That's the story for today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, because it makes telling these stories feel special. I hope it left you feeling a little bit lighter. Subscribe so we can keep finding the good moments together.